This week's Performance Anxiety features artist, musician, filmmaker, and more Steven Cerio. Steven's work with the performance art band The Residents is in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art. He's drummed with bands like Drunk Tank, artists like DeeDee Ramone, put out solo albums, and more. He's made psychedelic art and films. He's done posters for King Crimson, Primus, and a whole lot more. He also has worked with other artists like Robert Crumb. That's not giving too much away for this episode. That actually just scratches the surface. He's also one of those people who you can talk to and just not want to stop talking to. Check out his art on Facebook. Check out his Instagram account, Steven_Cerio, and his website, stevencerio.com. Please enjoy my discussion with Steven on this week's Performance Anxiety.
Hey everybody, this is Steven Cerio, artist, musician, filmmaker guy, and I'm here on Performance Anxiety with the lovable, sharp, and intelligent Mark Shea. Take it away, Mark. Wow, this really does trigger like a gland of performance anxiety just having to read that. I'll improvise and talk to you for 2 hours, but you telling me something to read, I'm not clamming up.
I've never been to Detroit. I don't know.
Oh, it's a great city.
Yeah.
Really interesting. The people are really great. And it's just so interesting to drive around because it's in this beautiful state of ruin, and bears are starting to move into the city. And
what?
Oh yeah! Oh yeah!
Oh my gosh! That's amazing. See, I was a photographer for years and years. I went to college for it, and that would be amazing to go get some wildlife photos in the urban area of Detroit. Would be incredible.
Oh, yeah, it's all photo ops there. That whole city is just a giant photo op.
Oh, man.
It really is. There's this one street, they called it Hate Street, but not H-A-I-G-H-T like San Francisco, H-A-T-E Street.
Oh, no. Why?
And if you drive down it, for some reason, people will get off their porches and throw stuff at your car.
Oh, my God.
And sure enough, drive there once and he goes, "You sure you want to do this?" And I go, "When's the last time you did it?" He goes, "About 15 years ago." We drive down, 2 kids come out in the street with a 2x4 and throw it at their rental car.
Whoa.
They just don't like cars on the street.
That's insane.
Everything's weird about that place.
Yeah, it sounds like it's like a mental facility or something. That's crazy.
Oh yeah, just that one street.
Oh my gosh, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on with me tonight. This is going to be a lot of fun. I've been looking forward to this. So I want to find out a little bit more about you because I've done some research, and it's funny because while I was looking up some of your work, and I've recognized the artwork, but I never knew that you had done it. I never knew the artist behind it. I wanted to ask you how you got involved in art. Is it something that you've been doing your whole life? And how did you develop your very unique individual style? I know that's kind of a weird, a broad question to ask, but.
No, it's one of those things. I was an only child, so I spent a lot of time alone when I was a kid. My mother used to have to drag me outside because I knew how to entertain myself at a young age. And so I was always drawing, and my parents were very into music. So we would switch from like Johnny Cash and Patsy Cline to Louis Armstrong within a heartbeat. Oh, okay. And so it was like I grew up with jazz around the house and then like old classic country. So then I started looking for new things. I stumbled on I was born in 65. So this is maybe like 72, 73, I stumbled on Deep Purple for the first time, and that got me really into music. And I was always drawing and like obsessively as a kid, and I just stuck with it. And when it got to time to thinking about going to college, I knew what I was going to do, and I knew I didn't have the focus. I mean, as most 18-year-olds don't, to do it on your own. I mean, if you have enough self-starter in you at that age, I mean, I applaud you.
Yeah.
But I knew that I knew I needed to be in a structured thing, to have someone make me draw every day. So I did that, went through, got out of school, immediately to New York. And when I got to New York, I felt, I moved from a suburb of, New York up in central New York. I grew up in a town called Liverpool. And then I dropped myself right off in the middle of New York City in 1988 with $700 in my pocket, which now it's funny, you couldn't even get. I mean, I was able to, pay a month's rent and put safety deposit down for that much.
Wow.
That's how cheap New York was. And I was in Forest Hills on top of it.
Oh, man.
But I was dropped in the middle of it, and I think my style changed like overnight from the subway trains, because they were still painted back then, and they were just beautiful. The obsessive quality of it too. It was very horror vacuous. Like there was no space on the ceiling or the walls, and that really had an impact on me. All that line and all of that and going on, and and the humbling experience of New York City too had an effect on me. Like, you're used to in a small town thinking, oh, someone might recognize me because I play drums or because I do whatever, the way you're thinking as a kid. Yeah. And you get to New York and, Kenny Scharf is walking down the street. I bumped into John Giorno. These people are like friends of Andy Warhol. Yeah. And you go, wow. And it was so liberating to know that you were the smallest thing in the world. It was so liberating, because when you're small and you're insignificant, as it made me feel, instead of having that feel like it was beating me down, I realized that I had freedom to do anything I wanted.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
It does. It makes perfect sense.
And I mean, I think, some people might disagree, but I think that's a very American point of view, a very American thing. Like you look at things like, well, I'll tell you the first thing that made me want to be an artist was professionally was when I was 13. Cable TV was new. That's how old I am. I'm turning 53 in 2 days. And
well, happy early birthday.
Oh, thanks. And I was staying up late watching Night Flight. And Night Flight put on The Resident's Mark of the Mole show came on.
Oh, wow.
Of the will of the people. Too long have my studies and research been for my own pleasures and distractions. Civilization needs the minds of its people. My first project will be the freeing of our underground
and I had never seen anything like that. And I was like, wow, these people are just painting. Like there was a primitiveness to it. And like these people are hand painting pieces of wood and pushing them across the floor and doing minimalistic keyboard parts. And you could tell they didn't really know how to use the keyboard. But that wasn't going to keep them from doing it. And that inspired me for literally the rest of my life. That inspired me. That was, to me, was going, hey, look, it's an open door. You don't need this. You don't need that. You don't need to grow up with this. You don't need to have had this. You don't need schooling for this. Jump in and do it. And I've run on that my whole life. I started doing films about 8 years ago. And it was on that same thought that I had from seeing that Residence film where I go, you know what? If I don't start doing films, that means that I never did any films. What is worse? I'd rather fall on my face than not ever have done it. And if I don't enjoy it, I move on. But that's how I did everything. I lied my way into everything, Mark. I got to New York. I was trained in illustration, but I'd never done a color illustration. Entertainment Weekly said to me, do you do color illustrations? Yes. I was able to, and I had gotten to know a bunch of people because I worked at a gallery. So I was able to call some of my favorite artists, people that I grew up looking at their stuff. I called Gary Panter and asked him, and he told me call Mark Beyer, and I was like, Mark Beyer, still one of my favorite cartoonists.
Wow.
And, so, Mark, tells me how to do it using acetate. I pull it off. Someone calls and says, we need to have a screen printing job. Do you prepare stuff for screen print? Yep. I've done it before in my life. There was everything. Hey, you have your drums here? Do you want to play in this band? Yup. I did. My drums were 5 hours away,
Yeah.
And so I was just ready to go,
That's that's amazing, and it's something I wish I had done a little bit more, I guess, earlier in my own life. Like I said, I was telling you earlier in the show, I went to school for photography, and I kind of wish I had discovered that, because I kind of do the same thing now with this show, and I another show that I do, another podcast that I do. I'll just reach out to people. I don't. What's the worst they can do? Say no, not like it, not hire. Whatever job I'm doing now, not hire me. Big deal. Who cares? But if I don't
have thick skin,
yeah. If I like you're saying, if I don't take the chance and go out and ask somebody to come on, they're not going to come on. But if I do ask, they might say yes, and then we can have a cool conversation and find out more about these people that I've enjoyed listening to or seeing their work for years. So. And in that vein, you mentioned The Residents, and that's actually one of my earliest. I guess it's a weird phrase to say, but earliest cable TV memories, because my grandparents were the first people I knew to have cable TV, and my brother and I are watching MTV, and this dancing eyeball comes on the screen, and another big skull comes, and I'm just sitting there staring at it, going, "What in the hell am I watching?" And we're close to the same age, and I remember watching it going, I don't get this, but this is really cool. I don't know what the hell I'm watching, and it stuck with me. And when I found out that you had done work with The Residents, it brought me back to that time, and it was really cool. So, what kind of work have you done with The Residents?
I've been working with them now for it's going on definitely more than I think around 24, 25 years.
Wow.
I've been working with them on and off on different projects. And recently, a few years ago, everything I did with them, prints, films, the toys I did for them, everything was put in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art. So they put it all in MOMA, that couldn't have been more of a thrill. And to have it be with, the group that influenced me to, pretty much start being an artist, and a group that's, credited with the invention of the music video and the invention of performance art.
Yeah.
That's a good person to ride on their back and do it,
for 25 years. How did you meet up with the band and start working with them?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm going to credit some of the artists that I met in New York. When I showed up in New York, I was working at Psychedelic Solution Gallery.
Okay.
And I got that job by lying. Again, nothing evil,
right.
But lying again. I went in, I wanted to get in the show. My skin was thick. I showed up and there was a show with Rick Griffin in it, H.R. Giger, Mark Mothersbaugh. And I was like, I want to be in this show. This is like the coolest. And I was like, I'm going to show this guy my portfolio. Demanded. I didn't, I demand to see. But I just walked in cold and I was like, is the boss here? I want to be in this show. And he felt for me because it was like I'd been in New York for literally a day and a half.
Oh my God.
So it was Jacob Burcaster, and he gave me, put me in the show with them. And it was the most thrilling day of my life. I knew right then I was hooked. And my mother goes, I don't know whether to cry or be happy for you. My mother said, because she knew that was it. To be in, some of those guys were heroes of mine growing up, like Giger, my God. I was one of him and Roger Dean were the first two people I had art books by when I was a kid,
Yeah.
But being there, the type of wisdom I would get, there were shows, I would sit around and talk to Robert Williams. Here I was 22, and Robert Williams was giving me advice, who proved to be like one of the sweetest men. He did so much for me when I was a young artist. When Juxtapoz started up, he made sure I got in. Just a great guy. I don't know if many people know what a great guy is. I'm sure they do, but just very supportive, just great guy. And he was there at the same time because they were doing a Zap show there. I was hanging out having pizza with Rick Griffin.
Oh, man.
Talking art. Ron Turner from Last Gasp, getting advice from Ron Turner. I mean, that guy is underground publishing. He's an incredible guy. And it was like one time I was literally having pizza with Rick Griffin and Ron Turner. And I was like, this is odd. And then I would get, and then I'm getting business advice the whole time from people like Robert Crumb. Crumb wanted to stay away. He was this is, late 80s, and he was still so famous then. He tried to stay away from people, and he'd go behind the counter with me during the day because they stayed there for like a week.
Oh, wow.
And this girl comes in from the New York Times, and she says, is Robert Crumb here? And Robert doesn't admit it's him, but he turns and he's working in his sketchbook like he always does. And he's everyone's seen that even in the movie, he constantly works in that sketchbook. And he was working in his sketchbook, and he starts talking to her. Hey, how long have you worked there? And she's like, a few years. Is Robert Crumb here? Like, she doesn't recognize Robert Crumb. God. And he's wearing the straw hat and the whole bit. and he just talks her up for maybe 3 minutes. And then he says, I'm Robert Crumb. How much does the job pay? And she said, $250. And he goes, oh, $500? She goes, no, it pays $250. He goes, oh, yeah, $500 is fine. And she goes, okay, I'll go make a call. Cell phone. So she goes out onto the street before I can even offer her to use our phone. She goes out in the street, comes back in. She goes, okay, I can get the 500. He rips a page out of his sketchbook, and he goes, here it is. She goes to reach for it, and he puts it in my chest pocket of my shirt, and he goes, Steve will have it here. Come back with the check, and he'll give you the drawing.
Oh, man.
And I was, man, to have the balls to do that, I was, 1 year out of school. And then, you had people that would come in and, Gary Panter laid some wisdom on me, and Rick Griffin, things that would change the way I did business. And this leads us back to the residence thing. I was talking to Gary once, and he said to me, I asked him outright, I said, man, what was that like? How did you get that Pee Wee gig? Doing the Pee Wee sets and the stickers. And because what a great gig.
Yeah. Okay.
And he goes, listen, don't ever sit at home. Like, he got almost stern with me. He doesn't remember any of this, by the way, but it's so interesting for me. He said, don't ever sit at home. Don't ever sit at home waiting for the truck full of money to pull up. Don't wait for the people to knock on your door. Knock on their door. He goes, I was down to $50 and I spent $40 on Xeroxing, and I would slide it under Pee Wee's door of his dressing room in L.A. And he was living in L.A. And he goes, and then 5 years later, I got a call for the Pee Wee gig. And that's a big lesson learned,
Yeah.
And then Rick Griffin's telling me, he goes, I was in there one night working after work until like 5 in the morning, and he stayed up with me and hung out. What a, it's like a fairy tale that time, especially at that age.
Yeah.
And you just chatting with me the whole time, and I'm like, dude, I'm so fucking tired. And he goes, Steve, he goes, if 20 years goes by and you're still pulling all-nighters like this, that means you made it and you pulled off being an artist. So revel in the fact that you're up working all night on this. That's something you should be proud of. He goes, because, people that aren't getting gigs aren't up at night, and they don't have the heart to stay up until 5 o'clock in the morning. He stayed up with me that late. I got all my paper cut for my first zine. I was working on my first zine,
Okay.
Stuff like that sticks with you a long time. So that is pretty much how I hooked up with the Resonance. I just had persistence. I heard there was a record show they were doing for Tectones Records out in Hoboken. And so I took the train out to Hoboken, and I went and hung out, and I left a pile of Xeroxes there for the band because I knew that they knew the band. And
right.
I was never into caring who the band was. We're going through a weird age now with the Resonance where everyone thinks they know who they are. And that movie came out where, I don't know, it just seemed like it was a Resonance 101 movie where the whole thing is kind of like, like wink, wink, we're revealing who they are, and yeah. I don't know. It didn't bring on a great new age, to me for the Resonance fans. I think a lot of people now just want to revel in the fact that they know who they are. And I feel like that kind of wrecks it a little bit. I mean, it didn't wreck the band. They'll always do great music. I'm not criticizing the band or anything. The group, it just, created that new age of it. But that's how I did it, just by sending copies and copies and copies of stuff. And then I started sending stuff to the office and more and more and more. And then one day I got a call about a movie, about them doing a film that never happened. And then there was another one that never happened.
Oh, God.
And the third and the fourth and the fifth did happen. So It worked out good. But that was it. A matter of persistence that I learned these states of. Another one, before I forget, was Joe Coleman was also very cool to me when I got to New York. And Joe, I was talking to Joe. I go, well, I need to run a studio and blah, 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 blah. And she's like, shut the F up about studios. And I go, why? He got almost like angry, and he walks into his kitchen and he opens up the pantry door, and he's got a table nailed at an angle in the back of the pantry where you couldn't even stretch your arms out to your side. And he goes, that's my effing studio. Don't let these people make you believe that you need to go spending $1,000 a month to be an artist, to have a studio. He goes, you work where you can work. And he goes, don't fall for that. Don't start doing that. He goes, you're going to spend more money doing that. Because you can work at home, you save money, you don't have to do as much work, and you can hang on longer. Wow. So it's like getting advice from all these guys, your first school. And I've lived by that stuff.
Yeah, guys who have made a big, names are sitting there telling you, hey, you don't have to do this kind of stuff to be successful. That's and at such a young age, I mean, that's priceless.
Even if they weren't really names per se, they're great artists and they're great guys. You know what I mean? On top of all of it. I know what you mean. But yeah, on top of all of it, I would have taken that advice, because it just rang true. There was a resonance to it.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, getting that kind of advice so early on is invaluable. I wish I had some of the similar experiences with some of my artwork. That would have been helpful. Instead of wanting, a certain piece of equipment, realizing that I can do it. I just have to do the art a different way.
That's important stuff to learn too, because you find out that there's ways that you can finish something, 100 hours quicker. That's a good thing sometimes. Yeah. Just doesn't sacrifice the quality of the work. So
now your work is very, very unique. I see your work, and I know you've done it. And it, like I was saying before, I've seen several pieces, not knowing it was you who had done it, but I've seen them before. As I was doing research for the show and trying to find things to ask you, because it's sometimes interviewing an artist is difficult to find. It's difficult to find the right questions to ask. And what I wanted to know is how you got into doing some of these posters and things, because I've listened to some of the music, Drunk Tank, The Residents, and I'm looking at some of the people you've done posters for. It seems that your style of art goes along with some of the music that you've made, but I wouldn't have thought of King Crimson hiring you to do posters and things like that. How did you get jobs with and I'm going to throw out some of these people you've done posters for, because they're amazing. King Crimson, Negative Land, White Zombie, obviously The Residents, Les Claypool, Semisonic, Monster Magnet, let's see, Dust Devils, John Popper, Manor Astro Man. Is it a matter of getting one gig and then somebody sees it and then they ask and it just keeps snowballing? Or is it you going out and saying, hey, I like this band, I'm going to be persistent and keep throwing my info at them and get the work from them through my persistence?
Well, I've got a nice, big, long, juicy, wearisome answer for that. Hopefully not wearisome. Music to me is music and art almost of equal importance. They're both kind of like the same thing to me at this point. At least my art and my music, they really, for the first time in my life, since I hit my 40s, feel like the same thing. And I'm not one to use the word expression because that means that you know what you're trying to say. I don't know what I'm saying, and I don't want to know what I'm saying, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
I want to be entertained by it too. I want to look at my stuff and hear my stuff and go, why did I make that choice? Because that's what I love about music. Like, Captain Beefheart and John Coltrane, Zappa and the Residents and Soft Machine are probably my favorite things in the world, music-wise.
Okay.
I made the full intention of letting the music that I loved influence my art, and I didn't know how I was going to do that, but in a way, I tried to illustrate the feeling of it, where my paintings, to me, in my head, look like Coltrane. Now, that's a big order to fill, and of course, I haven't pulled that off. But in my head, I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to have that sense of improvisation and, color, and it's just something I try to do, and of course you can't do it, but I really like to think that the music made its way into the art somehow, and when I started doing posters for free jazz and everything, I realized I'm not going to use my tight art for that. It didn't fit. It looked wrong. So I started using my more abstract work, which was influenced by listening to freeform jazz and, William Parker and, Eric Dolphy, John Coltrane. But let me go back earlier, though. The whole thing started for me with zines, because I was able to stretch out and, that community, people forget how great that community was, through Fact Sheet 5, and, Maximum Rock and Roll and, all that, where you would have these contacts with these people where you're trading tapes and you're trading zines, and people were drawing and people were doing great stuff. There was people like Bob X, who I've always loved Bob's work, and just a lot of people doing zines. It went from monster stuff and it was just all Xeroxed. Okay. And it was all cheaply printed, and you would just make your own at home, and you'd send out 100 of them, and it felt so good, and it fit in with that. Don't worry about knocking. You knock on the doors yourself. Don't wait at home. It filled that. Like, you'd be at parties and you'd be handing your zines out to people, and they went home with essentially a little portfolio of your work. So then, from doing the zines and everything, there were some of them that were a little bit larger, like Chemical Imbalance was the first magazine that I worked with that was, a pure art and music magazine. Okay. And from that, I started working for Dust Devils, and I did a poster for Dust Devils. And then later on, I would play with them a few times and become friends with them over the years. And I still play with Michael from Dust Devils. He plays on some of my Atlantic Drone records. Okay. That's how I started in the posters, was from that. And then from the posters, I got Exit magazine and started working for Exit with George Petros, who remains a really close friend to this day. And, I would do my own thing. I was drawing like biology book stuff. It looked like, biology stuff, like X-ray versions of biology books. And I was going into New York Times with those. I went into New York Times. That's how thick my skin is. Like you were saying before, you were saying, I can't remember what context you said it in, but the idea of you were just putting things out there, and like, I can't remember what you said that reminded me of that, but you said something that reminded me of that, like getting it there, getting it in front of them and not being scared. And there I was in New York Times, and they're like, what exactly do you want for us? And I was just like, well, do you ever need anything like this? And they're like, no, we don't ever need. So then at the time, Village Voice had, you don't realize these things because I thought it was a coincidence there, because I wasn't used to it. I grew up in a small town in central New York. I didn't realize that because Wes Wilson was art directing, that was the Wes Wilson, that one of the psychedelic poster arts. I didn't know that. I thought it was just a coincidence. Wes Wilson. I didn't know I was talking to Wes Wilson, once again, which is strange, but it was, but Wes took a bit of a shine to my work, and he said, look, you're doing biology book drawings. But listen, we need stuff more like this. Like he's explaining to me, like, we need drawings of things that we can say, this is a dog with Elvis riding its back with a candle in its mouth, whatever. And so I tried again. I got a little more figurative. And then he'd go, no, try this. And then a few months later, I'd go back again. So I was like, man, I really want to get illustration. Seemed like doing that would be better than working at a gallery. Not that it wasn't a blast working at that gallery. It was. It's Psychedelic Solution.
Yeah.
But at that point, I was like, one of the girls at work came into work one day and said, I slept with DeeDee Ramone last night. And I said, oh, you did?
Yeah.
And I go, okay, I don't want to know details, but is DeeDee cool? She goes, he does not like to wear condoms. And I said, okay, all right, that's all I need to know. And then she said, and I said, that's a little bit scary. And she goes, yeah, but he's talking about jamming. Would you want to come in and jam and play drums? Now, I had promised myself I was never going to play drums again.
Oh, man.
And then all of a sudden, I'm playing with DeeDee Ramone.
Jeez.
So now this leads into me becoming an artist, because I was talking to R.J. Smith on the phone, one of the writers for The Voice. He was with The Voice back then. And because I was up there talking to Wes Anderson again, Wes Wilson, trying to convince him that I was going beyond biology book illustration. And I was up there and I started talking to RJ, and he goes, was that you playing with DeeDee Ramone the other night? And I started telling him how Joey Ramone was paying off the sound man to wreck our mixes because he wanted DeeDee back in the band. And I don't blame him. To feel guilty about that. We're like, why don't you go back to the Ramones,
Yeah.
But he never explained it very well, but I guess he just had enough for a while. Who knew? Yeah. And I never found out why. But from that, Wes Wilson goes, I'm going to hire you now. And I said, why? And he goes, we're going to do RJ's going to write up an article about that. And I want you to do a portrait of DeeDee Ramone. Now you have to do a portrait. I don't want to see paramecium in it. I don't want single cell organisms in this. So I did it. And that was it. They started using me at the Village Voice. Back then, it paid $125 pop. My rent was only $300. So then from there, it turned into, hey, my friends at the Guitar World magazine, Jesse Reyes, work for him. And then it turned into Entertainment Weekly. And then all of a sudden, Entertainment Weekly, you'd stop by there and, you would just roam in and bring everyone some donuts or something. And you could walk out with $2,000 worth of work. Wow. And you're making 7 times what your rent was in a week or two.
Jeez.
So, but from that, the first gig there with the Dust Devils, it turned into other bands needing posters. So they were usually black and white. I knew a guy, the Monster Magnet gig happened. It was someone that worked. He was their crew or something. And he said, they have a single coming out. This is before they were big, of course. This is a great band.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They're just still a band in Jersey at this point, though.
Oh, yeah, exactly. They're still just a Jersey band.
Okay.
And but I loved them right from the start, though, and they're still a great band. I love their stuff.
Oh yeah.
And it was I did a street poster for them, and then I did something for there was a bunch of shows going on out at Coney Island. I did a bunch of posters out there for there's a few bands like Codeine, great band.
God, I remember Codeine. Yeah.
Oh yeah, great band. And then when I quit playing with DeeDee. Then I started doing posters for a bunch of the Matador bands and stuff like that. So I wind up doing some graphics for Unsane, and it wasn't anything that they asked for specifically, but it would be for different venues. Okay. And then Ministry, I got that gig through a venue. Some of them were through venues. Negative Land called directly. The Residents, of course, called directly. Claypool called directly. A lot of them called directly. But some of them were through the clubs. Now, the King Crimson poster, that was my first one I ever did. That was the first screen printed poster I ever did. Oh, wow. I learned how to do screen color seps by doing that, because they said, I think it was the the Rock Museum, whatever it's called, out in Cleveland, I think, had me do that. No, it wasn't them. It was some Cleveland show, though. Okay. And they said, "You know how to separate for screen print?" And I said, "Yeah." For screen print? I've been doing that my whole life. Yeah, because I'm a liar. Yeah. So I took that gig, lined my way into that, learned how to do it, But years later, and I'm a gigantic King Crimson fan.
Yes, me too.
And later in the day, I would get a very upsetting email from Robert Fripp's assistant. And he said, "Look, we're shutting down people with all these King Crimson posters because that age of posters when it was big, whenever that was, late 90s, too many posters were out there. And he didn't like that people were reprinting them and there were graphics he wasn't approving of. And I don't blame him."
Yeah.
And I said, "Look, I only have like 20 left." And he goes, "Oh, okay. Robert said that's fine." And I said, "Look," and here's that attitude again, the never give up attitude. I said, "Look, I'm going to send you a high res version of my poster. So you have it." Sure enough, he said, "Robert likes it and said that he might want to use it in the upcoming book that he's working on."
Oh,
so
wow.
I tried to turn some lemonade out of lemons with that because I was heartbroken. You don't want to upset people whose work you like that much,
Exactly. I know
that wasn't bootlegging. I would never bootleg.
No. Right. And like you said, you were actually contacted to do this. It wasn't something that you just decided to do and sell and make money off of their names. So.
Right. Yeah, I know. This was, it was through the club, whatever, but you're happy to do it and you hope the band sees it and you hope the band likes it.
Yeah. So now you mentioned playing drums with DeeDee Ramone. How did you start playing music? Was it something that you picked up? You started as a child and just kept going before you decided not to play drums anymore and then decided to play drums again?
I started at 9.
Okay.
My friend Pete was in front of me in line. I think we were in 4th grade. And I was like, I'm going to take guitar, I guess. And he goes, "Oh, they don't have guitar." And I go, "They don't?" And he goes, "No." And he goes, "I'm going to take drums." And I go, "You can take drums?" And I was very excited. And I still see Pete, and I said, "Thanks, Pete. I'm glad you were in line in front of me that day, Because I probably would have turned, because I didn't realize you could take drums,
Yeah.
And I took it very seriously from the get-go. And it was like I was into prog at a really young age. So it was like most things that I got to, a lot of good things in my life, art and music, were from old heads. People don't use that term anymore, but you know what I mean by that, right? Like an old kind of hippie type.
Okay, yeah.
Like wanting to blow your mind. And there was an older guy up the street, some head, with a marijuana leaf T-shirt on, probably.
Yeah.
Recommending it.
Something tie-dyed.
Yeah, and he's like, he goes, "You're listening to kind of some crazy complex stuff." He goes, "You want to hear some really complex stuff?" And he turned me on to Return to Forever when I was like 12 or 13 years old.
Wow.
And it was the Romantic Warrior album with the worst title for a record ever. Romantic Warrior.
Yeah.
And the worst graphic on the front. Oh my God, it's horrible. But it appealed to you as a 12-year-old seeing a knight in armor, But that is one of the great fusion albums. I mean, that record, I still have not worn that record out. It's just mine. But, and then another time, another older head type said, "You don't know Beefheart?" And I said, "No." And he goes, "Sit down." He goes, "You're going to want to get up and you're going to want to leave the room, but I'm going to make you listen to Doc at the Radar Station, and then you're going to take a break, and then we're going to listen to Trout Mask Replica." Changed my life.
Yeah.
And, it was like things like that. It seemed like it was always older guys at bookstores and stuff that were going, "If you like this, you really like this." I think kids miss on that nowadays because you're shopping online and things are being recommended to you. But, of all the things, someone recommended a King Crimson record to me, older guy at a record shop.
Yeah.
Someone recommended Yes to me. And through that, I got into Roger Dean, and it's like, I don't know, I owe a lot of the direction of my life to like older potheads.
Yeah.
She comes down to it. I never thought about it that way, but it's kind of the truth.
Well, it's funny that's I got into Crimson almost in a similar way, but not necessarily with an older head, but with my buddy Ed. His aunt used to work for Gem Records, and she had all kinds of promo stuff, and a bunch of it was King Crimson stuff. And she would give him all these records that she had like 5 copies of already because they were at the warehouse and they were promos that never got sent out 20 years ago, and they're cleaning out some corner of a warehouse. And so there's, 5 copies of Crimson's The Lizard. So she's like, here's a couple of copies. So he'd get one and then he'd give one to me. And so then I started listening to it, and I will take music that's given to me and I will listen to it. If somebody gives me music, that means something to me. It means you thought enough of it to hand it off to me. And so
that's old school.
Yeah. And so I would definitely give it a shot and listen to the entire thing multiple times. Even if I don't like it the first time or two, I got to see if it grows on me, because there's a reason you gave it to me. There's a reason you introduced it to me. So I'm going to find some, at least, even if I end up not liking it, there's going to be some nugget in there that I'm going to latch onto. So
music wasn't free then either.
No.
It's like now you recommend records to people and people are like, oh, well, which Coltrane record should I try? And I'm like, I'm not going to recommend a record to you like that. And I know that sounds uppity to people. They go, oh, Mr. Jazzbo won't recommend. I go, it's because you're not going to get it right away. And I didn't get it right away either. I'm not going to recommend Africa Brass to you or Ohm or, these things, because you're going to scrub through it. Yeah. And you're going to be done with it. And you're going to make a decision in 40 seconds whether John Coltrane is good or not.
Yep.
It's not worth it. If I recommend something like Have Them Beefheart, no, you're not. I'm not going to let you scrub through Trout Mask. The idea of you scrubbing through it with your Windows player makes me like actually irritates me. It puts me on edge. Like those are things that you have to spend time with and to be able to comprehend. And that's part of the beauty of it. It's so complex. You can't wear it out, but you can't sell that someone, at the snap finger. But like you were saying before, my father, when I was I think I was probably 9 or 10, and he said to one of his friends, he said, hey, is there any records my son should have? Do you have any records that you recommend? And he said, well, I'll give him a few of mine. So he gave me for just as a gift, he gave me the first Santana record with the Lee Conklin drawing of the lion on it.
Yeah.
Who's Next by The Who, and Alice Cooper Killer.
Oh, wow.
When I was at that age, right? I couldn't comprehend much of it. Alice Cooper was the easiest to comprehend because it was kind of a little bit scary in the whole bit, so I was drawn to that. But that Santana cover, that's what started me drawing in ink.
Oh, wow.
Once again, an older, well, not a head. He was a friend of my father's. Probably. I just drank some beer on the weekend. He may have been somebody else. Yeah, if he had those records, maybe, right? Yeah. He was just a older Italian dude from the north side of Syracuse, or wherever he was from. But I talked to Lee Conklin on the phone years later, and I walked away thinking he was a jerk because I told him, and he's not. Let me finish the story. I called him, and I was so thrilled to talk to him because, I was sitting there as a kid, and then I noticed that the eyeballs, the pupils, were made out of screaming women's faces, and that there were faces hidden in the nose, and the effect that had on me as a kid was intense.
Yeah.
And I was like, Dad, how do I do this? And my dad was thrilled because that's a crow quill you use, because my dad wanted to be an artist. He would draw in front of me, just hoping that I would latch onto it a little bit.
Wow.
And it worked. So if I would say something like, Dad, what's oil painting? We'd be in the car driving to an art store. That's, but you didn't push it. But you would just be like, here's oil paint, you know? And so I talked to Lee and I said, well, Lee, look, you're responsible for the turn my life took because of it. And he goes, well, I guess you're welcome, I guess. And I thought, what a dick. and then a week later, I go, what the hell else was he going to say? You know, He's a very guy. He's a very sweet guy. And it was just like, you know, I go, you could have said something else. What do you mean to say when someone says, you changed my life? What's he going to do, you know?
Yeah. I mean, there's only a couple ways you can answer that. Yeah. My cut's 10%. I mean, you know, there's
exactly
not a whole lot of different ways to answer that, I guess. Nobody's ever said that to me, so I'm not sure how I would answer that.
Yeah. What would you say? You know, I mean, I get thrilled enough when people say, you know, people say like, oh, my dad had your stuff on the wall when I was a kid, and then he gave it to me, and I've had a couple of your prints on my wall. There's nothing more thrilling than that. And tell you the truth, what you said before, when you said that you didn't really know my name, but you knew my art, that's thrilling. It's not a, you know, I like that you recognize it. That's more important than reading the bottom right-hand corner and seeing that I scribbled my last name on it, you know?
Yeah.
You know, that's thrilling.
You want to hear a funny story real quick? I'm here.
Sure.
I'm usually here to get funny stories from you guys, the people I interview, but I've got one for you.
Okay.
Some of your work was on the set for the show Workaholics.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a latecomer to Workaholics. I haven't even really seen the show, but I do another podcast. It's 90% comedy and like 10% sports. And the producer, one of my co-hosts is a guy named Tommy Caprio, and he was a producer for Workaholics. So there's just a little vague connection there.
Oh, really? Oh, so you had a connection there. My connection to it was Kelsey Fowler. And she's had me give her stuff for a whole bunch of movies and everything. And she's gotten me into a few other movies. I can't remember the names right off. There was another TV show I was on. Why am I forgetting what it was? I've completely forgotten what it was.
Oh, no.
But I know they used the Ministry poster in Workaholics.
Oh.
The Ministry poster.
I haven't seen it yet. I'm like I said, I'm late catching up with it because he actually produces Jim Jeffries' show on Comedy Central now. So I haven't had it. And,
cool.
And we do a podcast every week, and so I just haven't had time to go and look back at some of the stuff he's done. We've been doing this other show for over a year now. So, but it's funny you mentioned Ministry. I saw Ministry back in like 92, and that was the loudest show that I have ever been to. And they were outdoors. It was on the Lollapalooza tour. And that's the only show that I've ever been to where I actually held my ears, and we were outdoors. So that's how loud they were.
Oh man.
It was insane.
And they did some great stuff. The Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste.
Yeah, it was about that time.
That's a great album.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still think they have for the type of band they are. I think they have the best record title of all time, Dark Side of the Spoon.
Yeah.
That is a clever, awesome. For that genre of music and the way Al has led his life, that is a real. I think that's like the perfect album title.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense. So now you've been in several bands yourself. Drunk Tank. You were in Sprockets with DeeDee Ramone's Sprocket, and yep. You've done some of your other, your solo work with Atlantic Drone, which I've been listening to lately, and it is amazing. I am so annoyed with myself that it's taken me this long to find it. That first album you did is incredible. I was listening to it over and over today.
Oh, thanks. The second one is on LP only. We had some trouble with the label, getting it into distribution and everything, but I'm going to get it digitally distributed soon, like a real official digital distribution on that.
Oh,
and then
awesome.
what happened was the distributor talked me into using my name as the name of the band, because he said, you've been selling your name as an artist for 30 years, but I don't tour any of this music or anything. I don't do it professionally anymore. So I, how did I lose complete track of thought in the middle of a simple sentence?
I do it all the time.
Maybe I'm one of the old heads giving wisdom now, but I don't need those. How did I completely lose track of thought? What was I even talking about?
Oh, I had mentioned how much I enjoyed Atlantic Drone, and you said that the second album, we was working on distribution for that.
Yeah, they said to start using my own name, and when I did do that, the stuff started selling a little bit better, just because there was just a little bit of recognition on my name as an artist, because I haven't pushed myself as being, a professional musician in a long time.
Yeah.
I gave that up after the Matador days. I was on some other band and Matador too that I didn't want to talk about because it was just embarrassing. The work I did with them, I liked, but it just got to the point with it that it was embarrassing. I mean, at one point, right when I decided to leave, we were doing some radio interview, and we were up at some station up at NYU. Can't remember the name of their station there. And I was being nice to the girl, working there for different reasons. She was adorable.
That's a good reason.
I wasn't trying to pick her up or anything, but she was adorable. And we had a room full of records, and she gave me, a bunch of, I got the Fall Live. They had a bunch of the Fall albums up there to grab. And they got really mad at me afterwards, and they actually sat me down and told me this verbatim: if you want to start getting treated like a rock star, you better start acting like one.
What?
And I turned to them and I said, I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to be playing with you.
Oh, wow.
It was one of those things too, where when I got to that New York scene, where the Dust Devils and I hit it off, because the Dust Devils were really great musicians. All of them really play. And there was a prog element to it. And I came from, learning Yes songs when I was a kid and, figuring out Bill Bruford's drum parts. So I liked all of that. But when I got to New York, I was into the freeform scene, like William Parker and stuff. And, Jesus Lizard was still a young band then. I was very into Jesus Lizard, and also, kind of challenging, the time signatures. And I just think that band's genius. And, they were all about, there was kind of the part of the scene there was very into, I think it was a lot of people that didn't really grow up playing instruments. So they had a love for very simple, easy to play music, because I think for them, knowing they could play a track by the Fall, which is in no way not complex, but to play a guitar part in the Fall, you learn the riff and you play the riff for the entire song. There's hardly any changes. That's part of what makes it, to me, so psychedelic and also so punk rock at the same time. I love the Fall to this day. But, they loved everyone. It seemed like there was a rule that you had to love the Stones' Exile on Main Street, which I find unlistenable. I always have. And it was almost like there were this punk rock ethic where it was this back to basics thing. And I just couldn't fit in with that. Even when I was doing demos with DeeDee, I remember the producer yelling at me and going, what the F are you playing? What do you listen to? And I remember going, well, I've been listening to a lot of Scratch Acid lately and William Parker. And he goes, what the hell is any of that? He goes, where did that drum fill come from? And I go, what's wrong with an interesting drum fill? And I realized I was too defiant at that age. There I am, 22, 23. I'm getting a chance to show you that I can mess with time signatures. It wasn't the place for it. It wasn't the place for it. But that other Matador band, it was I went into it. I never wanted to be a career musician. I never wanted the cheap girl in the bar. I never wanted to, I was never into drugs. I even quit drinking at 22. I just got bored with it. So it was like after shows, I would go into the van and I would have books with me that I brought on tour, and I would sleep with the equipment every night, like like a Wolverine there to protect the equipment. And I'm in the van at night while they're partying, and I'm in the van like trying to wrap my head around Coltrane and playing Fripp and Eno to go to sleep, and and I'm reading books out there by flashlight,
Yeah.
and it just wasn't my world, but it's funny though, there were so many scenes then in New York, and never the twain shall meet with a lot of it. Like,
oh, really?
The main scenes, most of us were all in Matador bands. So, we were always hanging around with, I would always be somewhere with like Cop Shoot Cop or with,
Gosh, I remember that.
Dust Devils, Unsane were friends. So it was always that kind of group, and great bands.
Yeah.
On top of it, my God, I mean, before I started playing at Matador, I was already going to Dust Devil shows all the time. They were just mind blowing, but there was a scene there, and at the same time, you had Soul Coughing was happening too, but it wasn't happening with us. Like, I knew Mike Doty just because he was the doorman at New York Press, where I used to do illustrations for. And we never became friends or anything, but I would look at him and go, why does that guy look so familiar years later? And I realized he was the guy up at New York Press. And he's one of the only, tell you the truth, he's one of the only songwriters I follow now. I just think he's an incredible songwriter. Yeah, he was formerly with Soul Coughing. But we would never run into Soul Coughing. They had a hip hop thing going, and we were more into the uber aggression and, stuff. And then there was a few other bands that were really good. They were on, they were all working with Kramer's label. They were on Shimmy Disc. And there were some great bands there, like Fly Ashtray, Uncle Wiggly. But the thing was, it was like everything was centralized, though, in New York back then. Everything was in the Lower East Side.
Okay.
And now it's not. Like, everyone wants to promote their own neighborhood in Brooklyn, and no one admits to living in Queens. As far as I know, no one lives in Queens. I remember people back in the day actually saying things like, oh, you live in Queens? Do you mean Long Island? Because back then, it was only cool to live in Manhattan.
Right.
I remember the director said to me, whoa, an art director doesn't live in Brooklyn or Queens. I was like, I don't know what that means. Yeah. You want to pay times more? I go, and how long is it going to take you to get home? They're like, about a half hour. I go, it's going to take me about 35, 40 minutes. Big friggin' deal.
Yeah.
But the scene back then was so united. Like, you'd walk into, like, Max Fish was new back then. Had a great jukebox. They had Husker Du on the jukebox.
Oh, wow.
And Jesus. And if you came in with a single, they'd put it on for you. It was just a great Lower East Side neighborhood bar. And awesome. Anytime a Matador band was in town, they'd come there and hang out. I remember one time there was an article in New York Press, and it said, and the new bar, Max Fish, go there and stand in line in the bathroom. And while you're there waiting, meet 15 or 20 different people from Matador bands. And Mark Eibold was in Dust Devils back then, and he left Dust Devils and went on to play with Sonic Youth and Pavement.
Yeah, oh yeah.
To my next little story, and this is not I'm not saying anything bad about Pavement here. It's just that we were, I was sitting with the bass player from Drunk Tank, Julian Mills. That band was really his. That was his brainchild. He started that band in Chicago. Guy really had a vision for what he wanted to do. And what I added to his vision was, how about we make the whole heavy record feel like a swing album? So the whole thing has swing feels to it, but I'm playing incredibly violently. But when you come down to it, it's all based on like swing tunes. So every time there's a break, I'm going, it was like a joke. No one picked up on it. But anyway, I was sitting with Julian before a show, and it was some big show and it was being filmed, and there was a bunch of bands playing. And there was these two kids. I'll never forget this. They're sitting next to us, and Pavement was playing. I had just played, I think, at CB's the day before. And the kid said to the other one, he goes, "Have you heard Pavement yet?" And the other kid goes, "Yeah, man, I'm totally into it. I was at the show last night." And the kid goes, "Thank God they came around. I was sick of pretending I was into Cop Shoot Cop."
Oh, wow.
And I was just like, that really, like, both of us, just our stomachs, and it's no offense to Pavement or anything. It's just that there was a sense of, I hate using the word, but avant-garde's a good way to say it. There was a good sense of avant-garde then. Everyone was going in different directions. I mean, they were calling what most of the scene I was in the noise scene, right? But when we got there, who was running that town, it was Sonic Youth, Swans, Jim Thurwell, Cop Shoot Cop. It was very heavy stuff, very complex, very heavy stuff. And it was like, even on my kit, I had pieces of like garbage and stuff that I would use for percussion instruments and stuff. And we just felt like there was something interesting going on. And I liked it because being into weird time signatures and stuff, I was in love with it. And it was just shitting on what I thought was the great thing about what was going on in the New York scene, and even in alternative music in general. Jesus Lizard was going strong at that time. Yeah. Even when they were playing CB's, they couldn't play under the name Jesus Lizard. They had to play under the name Lead Zeus Shit Jar. They switched I'm sure Yao was responsible for that.
Yeah.
Switched the letters so you could do it. And Julian literally, he goes, "I'm going to wait till I see Pavement, and then I'm going to see whether we're going to keep the band together," because it was his band technically.
Okay.
And he waited and saw Pavement again, and he said he walked into the room and the audience was swaying back and forth, and he walked out. He called me from a phone right in front of CB's, and he goes, "We're done. We're done."
Oh, wow.
And he goes, "It's over." He goes, "It's over," and it was. It was over. Everyone was reminded again, and once again, I'm not picking on Pavement. I'm really not. Mark's a sweet guy. Last thing I want to do was feel like I was saying something nasty about him. But it was just, I tell you the truth, I've only heard maybe 3 songs by them, so I don't even have an opinion about them. It was just that everyone found straight rock and roll, and I was hoping that it was dead and gone, to tell you the truth. I was hoping that straight rock and roll was dead and gone. I've never really, I know it's a horrible thing to say, I never really liked rock and roll. I mean, the only rock and roll band I listen to is probably Replacements, sometimes some Cramps, and like MC5 and Stooges. I don't really like straight rock and roll. People whining and writing bad lyrics is pretty much what it most of it is to me. The only songwriters I even follow nowadays are Kristen Hirsch, Mike Doty, and I don't know, maybe a couple more. Robin Hitchcock. Oh. It's like, I don't know. I kind of lost faith in it. I lost faith in. I love music. I don't really like songs. I don't think I ever liked songs. Even as a kid, I was drawn more to When the Levee Breaks than I was to Black Dog. I wanted the long song that I could get. I mean, this is all just my personal, I feel compelled to say that. It's just my personal take on it. But just to me, I like to get lost in stuff. I like to not know where I am.
Yeah. And I know exactly what you're saying. I get drawn more towards the sound in any given song. Like you're saying, When the Levee Breaks, it's more than just the 4 instruments is playing. It creates this enormous atmosphere